Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammad Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to the last fall 2024 session of Rethinking History, Returning to Archives and Documents, a virtual seminar series co-convened with my colleague, Professor Arzu Azad of Oxford University. Rethinking History is a collaborative project of the EOM Institute at the University of Toronto and the Invisible East program and the Department of Continuing Education at Oxford. We are grateful to Professor Touraj Atabaki of Leiden University for accepting our invitation to share his archival explorations with us. We are also thankful to the Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for their exemplary support of the Iranian Studies Institute. At the outset, and before introducing our speakers, I would like to express our individual and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to teach and learn on their ancestral homeland. Professor Touraj Atabaki, our speaker today, will be introduced by Professor Arzu Azad. Professor Azad, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Tavakkoli for this very kind introduction and for honoring the original owners of the land on which you are sitting. We are sitting over here across the pond in the UK. But share in this joy. So it gives me a great honor to introduce our next, our speaker, the final speaker of this semester's series. As you know, we are now well into our second year and are really looking forward to another exciting set of lectures next year. And you will be hearing about that in due course. But for today, we have Professor Touraj Atabaki, who is Senior Research Fellow at the International Institute of Social History and Professor Emeritus of Social History of the Middle East and Central Asia at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He studied theoretical physics, actually, and later history at the University of London and Utrecht University. Following positions at Utrecht and the University of Amsterdam, he joined Leiden, where he held the chair of social history of the Middle East and Central Asia. His research encompasses historiography, social history of labor, and subaltern studies in the 20th century, Iran, the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey, as well as the Caucasus and Central Asia. His forthcoming publications are Toiling for Oil, that's a good one. A Social History of Petroleum in Iran, which is coming out with Cambridge University Press. Then Fallen in the Whirlwind, The Odyssey and Destiny of Iranian Victims and Stalinist Great Repression in the Soviet Union, which is coming out with Edinburgh University Press. And you can search his other publications if you follow his page, his staff page, which I can add to the chat shortly. But without further ado, I will pass the word to our speaker, whose paper is entitled Uncovered, Untold Histories, Iranian Political Activists and Migrant Workers Under Stalin's Great Terror. Professor, please.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Very grateful to invitation to Professor Mohammad Tavakkoli. Very grateful to the introduction of the Professor Azad. It's an honor to be here with you. And let me, before starting my talk, say that my coming book what Professor Azad referred to is now out. I got it yesterday. It's called Toiling for Oil, Social History of Petroleum in Iran, Cambridge University Press.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And now my talk today is about a long-term research. I did it almost 25 years on the fate of the Iranian communities in the Soviet Great Terror. The outcome of this research was published first in Russia in this book. It's called The Very Terrible Years by the Academy of Sciences, Russian Academy of Sciences. The second print was also published. And then I tried, I asked the book has been translated to Persian by Dr. Golkar, and this is the Persian translation. It's called فتادگان در گردباد سرگذشت و سرنوشت قربانیان ایرانی سرکوب‌های فراگیر استالینی در شوروی, that is fallen in the whirlwind, the odyssey and destiny of Iranian victims of the Stalinist great repression in the Soviet Union. Co-author is my friend Lana Ravandi Fadai. This book was supposed to be published in Iran, first by Nashr Cheshmeh, but later on they discovered that, I'm in a blacklist by the Iranian government, and they don't allow me to publish it in Iran. So Baran, Nashr Baran, published it in Sweden. I hope, one day it gets published in Iran as well. So my talk is the fate of the Iranian communities in the in Soviet Union. Let me to say that, the great terror in Soviet Union began in 1930s, mid-1930s, and it's not only affected hundreds of thousands of the Soviet citizens, but also thousands of foreign political activists, labor, well-known political activists from all over the world, from United States to Britain, to France, to, let's say, East Europe, and also coming Greece and Turkey and Iran. And many of these victims were migrant laborers, political activists sheltering and working on Soviet soil. In my book, what I did is by exploiting the memoir of those who survived the labor camp, and also the different Soviet archives and non-Soviet archives outside Soviet Union. I tried to give for the first time as much as possible a comprehensive picture of what's happened in 1930s. There are a number of good research on the Soviet Great Terror during the Stalin, done by the Soviet historian, non-Soviet historian, but chiefly they are focusing on the Russians, what happened in Russia. Less is paid attention paid to the non-Russian citizens. For example, the Greek or the Poles, the Polish. And in my case, the Iranian, who just one of the very large community living in different part of the Soviet Union, especially in the Caucasus and Central Asia. So what I did is just, first of all, I started this project in late Soviet time, in 1988, 89. And I applied for the visa to go to the Soviet Union to do my research, and it was denied always because the research visa was not really possible to get at that time a tourist visa. You could get a visa for going there as a tourist, but not as a researcher. But finally, they let me to go to the Soviet Union, and then they advised me not to work on a Stalinist purge because that's not possible. So I pretend that I'm doing something different, and I did something different for my PhD. But next to that, what I did for my PhD, I started collecting materials. And I was very lucky because I was in the right time and right place, because that was the last years of the Soviet Union. Archives gradually opened, and I had them in contact with, almost freely contact with some survivors of the Stalinist purge in different cities in the Soviet Union, from Tbilisi to Yerevan, Baku, Tashkent, in Dushanbe, Ashgabat, Moscow, St. Petersburg. So I interviewed them, and they gave me the first-hand account of what happened in the 1930s. And then I also interviewed the second generation of the Iranian who political migrate to Soviet Union after the fall of the Firqe Demokrat Azerbaijan. That is the 1946-47. After that, I mean, they migrated. So when they went there to the Soviet Union, they met some of the victims of the Stalinist purge returning after the death of Stalin in 1953. So the main question was for me was that, okay, next to this interview and collecting all these oral history, how is it possible to get access to the archives? And the first easy archive for me to get access was the archive of the Institute of Marx, Engels, Lenin in Moscow, and in the capital of each republics. That was possible to do that one. That archives is now has got a different name in Moscow. It's called Gaspi they call it in Moscow. That is the Russian State Archive of Social and Political History. And in different republics of the former Soviet Union, there are different names: political history, social history, political movements. But anyhow, the Marx, Engels, Lenin the Institute archive is possible to visit by non-Russian citizen. So what you find there is a large part of the Third International Comintern archive there, which I did. Activities of the Communist Party of Iran. The Communist Party of Iran founded in June 1920, and the large number of the Iranian leaders of the Communist Party of Iran, almost 98% of them were murdered, killed, executed during the Stalinist purge. So I could get them in some access to the background of these individuals who were there and what they did in the Communist International, and the link they had with Iran, the activities, the underground activities, uncovered activities they did in Iran. So this is somehow I could get. Then I went to there is another archive which is accessible at that time, was a Russian Federation State Archive. It's called GARF archive, which was also possible at that time. Let me just say something for clear that what I'm referring to this archive, that was possible in after the last years of the Soviet Union, but mostly after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the first 10 years, 15 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, you could get them in. Unfortunately, the last 10 years becoming more and more difficult to get access. Almost impossible. You know, you had a very great archive of Stalinist purge. Victims of the Stalinist purge belong to an institution, a foundation called the Memorial. Memorial is a foundation based in Moscow and is in collecting all the documents on the victims of the Stalinist purge and defending human rights. Unfortunately, this institute lately was closed by the Soviet, by the Putin administration. And there's something maybe interesting for you. We had a very interesting museum in Moscow, founded by the Memorial. It was a great museum about the Gulag, the forced labor camp. Lately, last month, this museum was also closed. So they try, to apply a sort of selected amnesia to the history of the Soviet Union by the Putin administration. Anyhow, so I had an access to this archive in Moscow, and in St. Petersburg State Historical Archive of Riga. That was that. And this was possible if you get them in permission. At that time was possible for the non-Russian citizens to go there then. There was another archive was possible to use it, and I used it, intensively. That was the Russian Federation Foreign Policy Archive. That is AVRPRF in Moscow. That is also possible for that was also possible for the non-Russian scholars, getting permission, of course, first, and writing down what you are doing and what is a specific period and theme of your research, and then was possible to go and work there. But the most difficult one was almost impossible for, not almost impossible, totally impossible for the non-Russian citizen, is the archive of the Federation, the Russian Federation Central Archive of FSB. FSB is the new name of KGB. And in the FSB, KGB, there is a special archive is on NKVD. NKVD is the secret police, Ministry of Interior, who was operating in late 1950s, and that was the large part of the archive of the Stalinist purge is in NKVD archive. So it was not possible to go to there. And then here, my colleague Dr. Rana Ravandi, because she's a Russian citizen, got the permission and could get access to this archive. And what was interesting, we could, for the first time, get access to all those minutes of the prisoner interrogation. For example, figures like Sultanzadeh, Zarre, Ladbon, Hesabi, all of them. We could get them in one. And at that time, the first thing, they ask is that, do you have a permission of the family? And if you said, they check if the family is still there in Russia or somewhere they could get in touch, that's fine. Then they ask you, to get a permission from the family. If not, okay, that's another story. You can get some permission to get them to have access to these archives. So in case, for example, of specifically in case of Sultanzadeh, we had to get a permission from the family of Sultanzadeh. His daughter was living in Moscow, and then we had the written permission, formal written permission, registered written permission from her to get access to this archive of the interrogation of the Sultanzadeh. So these are the archive there. So, but I knew that the archive of the Iranian victims of the Soviet purge is not only Moscow. In Moscow, we had a very, very limited number of Iranian political activists. the tops of tops are in Moscow, were in Moscow, leaders of the Communist Party. But I knew that the massed members of the Communist Party of Iran were living in Baku, Tbilisi, some in Yerevan, very less, and then in Tashkent, Ashgabat. So I tried, to move to Baku first, because the Baku was accommodating a large community of Iranian. I moved to Baku and tried to get access to the NKVD archive in Baku. This is totally different from Moscow, but same organization, Ministry of Interior, NKVD, Moscow. And the large part of this archive belongs to the Iranian community who living there, since 19th century. We had a migration of the Iranian labor, poor labor workers and poor labor to the Russian Tsarist Empire, seeking for works there, especially in a oil industry of Baku, or in the Trans-Caspian rail industry, and all these things. They were there. There's a large community of Iranian, thousands of Iranian, 100,000 of Iranian were living there. The good number estimates more than 500,000 to 600,000 Iranian living in this region in the late 19th century. Okay, so I knew that they were the majority of the non-elite victims of the Stalinist purge. They were there. So the elites, more elites, Moscow, and less elites in these margins of the Soviet Union border area. So I went into Moscow. I went to Baku, and what I did, I organized a conference together with the Ministry of Information of the Republic of Azerbaijan, what is called Vezarat Etelat. I approached them formally and I said, let's go do some work together on the Stalin's purge. So they allow me to get access to their archive after I organized the conference on behalf of the International Institute of Social History in Baku. So I had access to the interrogation of the Iranian mass arrest made in mid-1930s in Baku. And same thing, not organizing a conference, but I had managed, to get access also to Tashkent and Dushanbe, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And but Tajikistan is not very, the most victims of the living in Tajikistan moved their file moved to Tashkent. Tashkent was the base of the administration of the Central Asia at that time. So I visited and I worked in the archive of there. They could let me there. They were less restrictive than Moscow. They allow me to get access to the NKVD archive in Tashkent at that time. And in Baku was great. I had the opportunity to work there intensively in Baku. And what I found there was terrifying. It was very, very unexpected. At that time when the great terror started in mid-1950s after the assassination of Kirov, then a campaign initiated by the Kremlin to purge all the enemies of the people, class enemies of the people, kulaks, and the rich farmers. But more than that, anybody who is somehow affiliated to some political tendencies in the past, different, for example, from the Bolsheviks. So the first initiative was to get the Mensheviks, social revolutionaries, Trotskyists, and the royalists, and they were arrested. All these people people who had political activities in this. They were affiliated with different organization and political parties. But that was the very beginning. So they came to the Iranian. They knew there were some Iranian who were very belonging to the left opposition, they call it, labor opposition, they call it. That was in 1922, that we had a labor and left opposition inside the Bolshevik party, and then the Trotskyists, Iranian Trotskyists, and the Iranian Mensheviks in Tbilisi. So here we have thousands of Iranian arrested there. That was the beginning. Aghayev was one of them. But at that time, was the execution was not on the agenda. They arrested, trial, and then 10 years in prison in Magadan or other concentration camp. But gradually there was a competition between the different republics, and they said, which republics arrested more enemies of the people. So we're very proud. Republic of Uzbekistan said, last year we arrested 10,000 the enemies of the people in our republic. And then, for example, the Republic of Azerbaijan said, what is kidding? What is about 10,000? We did 12,000. So there was a competition between republics, to increase the number of arrests. That was that. So in this case, we have got a mass arrest began. And the Iranian who lived in a border area were called to Moscow and departed either to Central Asia or trialed and executed or imprisoned. The number of the execution was so high in Azerbaijan that we have written in our book, based on the document, we discovered that there is a report by the NKVD saying that the people, they don't go swimming in a Caspian Sea anymore, because they said the water is not good, because when they execute people in Azerbaijan, they throw the bodies in a Caspian Sea. So we don't go to Caspian Sea. So now every month we had a report written by the secret police to NKVD talking about how the individuals, the people in the republics, think about the behavior of the government. So one of these, they were there. And then what happened, in the Soviet Union at that time, and this is great source of writing social history, is writing report against each other. In Russian, there is a term called donos. That means, when you meet somebody for dinner, if you invited them for the party, for anything, like that, after meeting, we write a report about the person, and you put it in an envelope and put it in a post box. You report against each other. That is called donors. So we have got piles of these donors in the archive of NKVD. And for me, it was very interesting to read each of these reports. And it's more than, politics. What was interesting for me was about everyday life, about food, about music. Because, for example, there was a donor, somebody wrote about having a dinner with somebody in a cafe, in a restaurant, and then writing about the background of this was this music, we had this dinner, we had this, we had this joke and things like that. And finally says, something about the political affiliation of that person. Okay, so we had a piles of these donors. These are very, very interesting source for writing social history of everyday life, the history of everyday life in the Soviet Union in 1930s. So this is what we did. We exploited them in these archive for writing these things. Of course, I mean, there was a state archive of the Russia, and then the other part of the Russian Federation archive, we used it, like, for example, the archive of Astrakhan. Astrakhan was important because Astrakhan, the north of the Caspian Sea, some of the refugees, I mean, based in Astrakhan before, I mean, going to the north. So what we find in the archive in Baku, in Tashkent, we find a very detailed account of individual like Ehsanullah Khan Dostar, one of the members of the Socialist Republic of Iran, Soviet Socialist Republic of Iran, and other activists of the Jangali movement like Zareh, Hesabi, and others. Ladbon, the brother of Nimayushich, also executed in Soviet Union. And then, I mean, in Tashkent, we could get them in the archive of Alavi, Morteza Alavi, the brother of Bozorg Alavi. We got to get him in the archive. He was also, I mean, executed. No, but he in his document is not, I mean, executed. He says, I mean, he died because of the illness in the concentration camp. But we know that, I mean, usually, I mean, when they didn't want, I mean, to get directly linked to the execution, they said, I mean, died in concentration camp, in prison. So this is that we did in Moscow. These archives we did in Moscow and in other republics of the Soviet Union. Of course, I mean, based on, we cross-checked all these details with the Iranian archive, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Archive of Documentation and Diplomatic History in Tehran, Iran National Archive, Iranian National Parliament Archive, and one of the interesting archive is the Iran President Office Archive in Tehran. So the reason why we crossed, because I mean, some of the reports reaching Tehran through the embassy in Moscow or through the consulate in Baku reached Iran and describing the life of the individuals in Iran, victims of the Stalin's purge. They didn't know details. The Iranian embassy didn't know details about how everyday life of this Iranian is, but they had some report from here and there, and they just point this report and send it to Iran. So we should cross-check the names. We use them in the archive in Iran as well. And of course, I mean, there were archives in other European and United States. I mean, we use them in sometimes referring to the similar things happen to the American or to British or to other nationals in this period. So what we did is that, I mean, we could register in this book the 2046 Iranian executed plus round about 3,000 who were also executed not as Iranian but as a Soviet Union, Soviet citizen, but they were Iranian origin. I'll tell you about that. And then round about 15,000 Iranian were arrested and sent to the concentration camp. So why they are the difference between these 2046 and roughly 5,000? Because when the Soviet Union was established, in different periods, Soviet Union called on all non-Soviet, non-Russians, citizens, subjects in the Soviet Union to accept the nationality of the Soviet Union. In 1925, in 1927, in 1930s, the very last one in 1936. They called on all non-Russian citizens to accept the Soviet to accept the Soviet nationality. But a large part of the Iranian did not accept this nationality. They wanted to have their own laissez-passer and then to be considered as a subject of Iran residing in Soviet Union. Gradually that was changed by the 1936, a large part of this community were accepted the Soviet Union, Soviet the citizenship. Okay, what happened? Some of these were executed in the documents. We know that they're Iranian. The birthplace is in Iran, north, south, east, but we know that they are Iranian by birth, and we know that, I mean, they accepted the Soviet nationality or citizenship, but in the document, they are not considered as a Iranian executed Iranian, but called Russian Soviet executed. So this is a difference, I mean, between these things. So this is something that I should add to this. And then, of course, I mean, another things, I mean, as I'm sure some of you know, are familiar with Iranian contemporary history, is that in 1936, a large number of the Iranian migrants residing in Soviet Union were sent back to Iran, deported to Iran. In 1939 was that just before the outbreak of the First World War, they were deported to Iran. And in Iran, we call them Mahajiran. They were Armenian, non-Armenian Mahajiran. And this is another story. This is a subject of an article I wrote about them, what's happened to these Mahajiran in Iran. Okay. This is something that I would like, I mean, since I don't have much time, just few minutes, few things, I mean, just then I close my, I finish my talk, is this, for us, I mean, this research was very, very terrible, was really sad for me. I mean, working on that and going through the history of these people, their life and living of these individuals was really disturbing. So I decided to just say to history that, I mean, we don't forget and we don't forgive. So I wrote a letter to the municipality of Moscow and asked them to give me permission to have the stone of the memorial for these victims of the Stalinist purge. Where? In garden or park or nice wooden green area outside Moscow called Kommunarka. Kommunarka was a mass grave. Next to it was Botova. Kommunarka is a mass grave. The people who were arrested in Moscow, they were tried in Lubyanka. Lubyanka is a square in Moscow, which the headquarters of the NKVD is there. And the people tried in Lubyanka, and then they moved to 25, 30 minutes driving car to Kommunarka. And in Kommunarka was just was a source of garden, woods with a nice dacha villa of the belonging to the former the head of the NKVD. They were gathered, I mean, in this Kommunarka, and they were killed, machine gunned collectively, and they were buried collectively in Kommunarka. So what I did, I get a permission, and they gave me permission to just put in a memorial sign in this Kommunarka on Bina. Let me to see if I can find them in this picture in Kommunarka. And they just said, fine, you can do that, but not should be higher than 1 meter. This is you can find it. BBC made a documentary about this. If you are interested, I mean, send you later the documentary made by BBC. This called, this is the picture in this book, and it's written on that, نامشان بر دل این خاک جاودانه نشسته است. به یاد هزاران تیرباران شده، ایرانی تیرباران شده در جنایات دولتی شوروی. This is what I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, Professor Atabaki. It's really a fascinating journey through various archives. Just to start the conversation, the charges, the blanket charges, were enemy of the people. And I am wondering whether you have looked at specific charges. For example, does the charge against Zarre or Ladbon or Sultanzadeh, do they repeat the same cliche, or do they have a particular specific charge having been involved in something specific? And this is the kind of thing that it would be great if you could elaborate.
You know, there was a very, very cliche, general cliche for everybody. Mm-hmm. You are the spy, you are the agent of the British, agent of the Iranian regime, and working for different secret organizations of the West. This was very general. But specifically, they referred to their activities in the 1920s and early 30s in the Communist Party of Iran. So you were radical left, you were involved with the Trotskyist activities, or you will some sympathy for the Mensheviks, or you had, I mean, there is a report about your affiliation with a monarchist, or you are belonging to a sort of rigid Baha'i community, because, I mean, there were also, I mean, there were Baha'is also arrested, and they, most of them, they were charged of having connection through Haifa with British imperialism. And these are, you know, specifically they refer to these, I mean, cases. I mean, so case by case, although you have very general accusation, very cliche, repeating for everybody, but the case by case, I mean, so that's the reason in our book, what we in order to make the readers, to help the readers to understand better the charges, the half of the book, or less than half of the book, is about the activities of these individuals from the 1715 to 1930s.
Yeah,
20 years.
Just a follow-up. What I'm wondering is that at a time that Soviet Union was threatened by imperialism, right? And these were potential comrades, friends of Soviet Union. And I'm wondering about how this transition takes place from a friend of Soviet Union to a comrade from other places into an enemy. Again, specific cases. For example, did they identify someone being spying, or are those listed? If they have had British connection, are those are listed, are just empty signifiers?
They didn't really, we couldn't find any documents confirming the link of these individuals with the foreign secret services.
Right.
Baseless accusation.
Right.
Totally baseless accusation. They were committed communists up to the end, and when the last word of their, what they said, I mean, the last word was long live proletarian internationalism, long live Comrade Stalin. This is their last words. For example, when the interrogator asked them, do you really believe on correctness of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union? And the answer was, of course, yes. So the Communist Party of the Soviet Union says you are enemy of the people. Do you have anything against that? So, of course not. If the Soviet Communist Party says that, agree. You know, this is something dividing society between khodi and ghair khodi. You know, you're either with the people or enemy of the people. So, you know, and to understand that, I mean, how this shift, for example, Ehsanullah Khan Dostar, I wrote, I mean, I found, I mean, some interesting, I mean, reference to Ehsanullah Khan Dostar, calling, he was called Camarade Rouge, Red Comrade, Camarade Rouge. And the same Camarade Rouge later on became enemy of the people. And I wrote, I mean, from the Camarade Rouge to the enemy of the people. So they arrested him in Baku, interrogated in Baku. He was not really, he was one of the elites of elites, Ehsanullah Khan. So what they did, they said, I mean, look, we can't make it with him because he's too complicated for us to sort out. So he was sent to Baku to continue the trial in Baku. Sorry, in Moscow. So he was sent, and he was executed in Moscow.
Very good.
And,
just one follow-up. Whether during this sort of Stalin years, I'm confident that there must have been a lot of criticism, and whether the Iranian communists and Iranian Reds, have they in any way in their gatherings complained and sort of voiced their opposition to the trend that was taking place, this sort of more authoritarian direction that Soviet Union was taking under Stalin? Were there any kind of discussions along that line?
You mean in the Soviet Union?
Amongst Iranian community, part of the Communist Party, leftist Iranian movement that resided in the Soviet Union?
No, there's no reference. I mean, they didn't dare even, I mean, to talk about, I mean, to criticize, to talk about, to say anything.
Yeah.
They became, most of them, they became, I mean, they tried to become apolitic because they were quite, I mean, afraid of what's going to happen to them. And, but there is some reference, it maybe is interesting. The news of the Moscow trial reached Iran in late Reza Shah period. And not about the Iranian, but generally reached Iran the news of the trial of the Zinoviev, Bukharin, and the others reached Iran, and reached the Iranian communists who were at that time in prison in 1938-39 in Tehran, in Qasr. And there was a debate between the Iranian who were a supporter of these trials and said Soviet Union doing good job, and there were others, I mean, who were not convinced that what's happening in the Soviet Union is right. For example, Ardashes Avanesian and the others, I mean, Pishawarid and the rest, they were quite convinced of what's happening in the Soviet Union is right. But on the other hand, there were people like Yusuf Iftikhari who doubted about, I mean, the correctness of these. And that's the reason when the Soviet Union invaded Iran and to the party was founded, Yusuf Iftikhari, together with his comrades, Rahim Hamdad and Ali Omid, they didn't join to the party because they had their own critic of Stalin. And they were labeled as a Trotskyist. But, I mean, they said, I mean, we are not Trotskyists. And we are just, I mean, criticizing what Stalin is doing and the Stalinist purge.
Very good. Thank you very much. Professor Purzan, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Atabaki, and I really appreciate the intentions and the effort you have put into this important work, which in some ways is quite close to my heart. As Professor Tavakkoli might know, I lived and worked in Tajikistan, Dr. Atabaki, and one of the biggest honors of my life was that I had the pleasure of becoming very closely, let's say, intimately, to get to know Dr. Ataullah Safavi, one of the survivors of the Gulag, and probably the only one who died in our city in Toronto. And between around 2002 till the end of his life, maybe 2010, 12, we were very much in touch, and you probably know his book, No One Got Old in Magadan, and a documentary.
I interviewed him. Yes, I interviewed him in the Soviet time.
Okay. I'm really glad to hear that, because you didn't mention him, but of course you didn't have the opportunity to mention all of them. Besides being an amazing person, what I wanted to mention about him was that he shared with me how, well, he was only 15, 16 when he was arrested, having crossed the border as a teenager with faith and ideological passion and commitment for equality and social justice. And he maintained that, of course, till the end of his life. But very early on, he became more independent-minded. And he would tell me that even when he moved to Tajikistan after the end of the Stalinist period, he would go to the top hill in Dushanbe, which I have often been to as well, and put up the flag of Iran. And he was often harassed by the Secret Service of Tajikistan for being an independent-minded Iranian leftist. And he had a great distaste for the other Iranians who worked with the KGB. And actually, he showed me at that time, he had a list of all the names, and in different colors, those who were independent, socially just-minded Iranians, and then those who were affiliated. So just in response to Professor Tavakkoli's question, yes, I think many of them did bravely stand up against autocratic regime that it was, while maintaining their faith in a socialism that was humanitarian. And maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Just one point. I mean, what means? I mean, they voiced, I mean, their critic about the Soviet regime. You know, after the death of Stalin in 1953, it took 3 years for the victims of the Stalin's purge, who still lived and living lived, and they were in a prison, in concentration camp. There was a rehabilitation, and they were returned to back from the prison, returned to their home in Central Asia, and then they get a permission, they get a rehabilitation, that they were falsely, they were accused of being the agent, and they were enemy of the people, of something like this. So the government, I mean, paid some money, and since let's say the mid-1950, especially after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, when the Khrushchev opened the file, disclosed the files of the Stalin's purge and what the crime has been made, gradually the Iranians start talking about what happened to them. But this was late, and that the only thing, I mean, I found it formally was by the Tudeh Party of Iran. At that time, published a special issue, an article in their theoretical journal called Dunya, and said about, I mean, that was what is done with the Iranian communists was not correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Colleagues, please
Yes.
don't hold back. Yes.
دکتر من ریز رو ندیدم.
دکتر عباسی، بله بفرمایید.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atabaki, for your wonderful talk, and also, as you said, some kind of sadness for everybody. My question is about the language of documents which you used in Russian archives. Are all of them are in Russian or Persian? Maybe some of them, including the reports that you said people write against or about each other.
We have got different, languages. Chiefly, those, the secret agent of the NKVD, they write the lingua franca was Russian. And then we have also reports on Turkish, Azerbaijani Turkish. We have Persian and very, very rare Armenian and Georgian.
Thank you.
Other questions, please raise your hand or
Yes,
something.
yes, I've been raising my hand for a
Professor
while.
Azad, بفرمایید.
Yes, thank you so much. Such an interesting paper, so much new that I've learned. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your, I always ask this question because I'm interested, about your methodology, how you choose your sources, which ones you use, which ones you don't use. Because it's always a question for us as well. How do we deal with our material? And I think it's something that will apply to all of us, no matter what period we work on. I work on medieval documents and archives. So I'd be interested to know how you approach this very fascinating archive. Thank you.
Very interesting question, because this is a type of research. When you use these sources and you don't know to what extent this is reliable, valid, or made it under pressure, torture. So it's very, very difficult, to judge. So what we did, together with my colleagues, we tried, to cross-check as much as possible with a memoir, published, non-published memoir of the individuals, and archive of different departments. We try to cross-check it. And we try to take some distance emotionally from what we read. It was because sometimes it was so distressing, so, terrible, to go through these individuals report and accusation. And accusation, you don't believe that. Just say one word. The majority of these people who were executed, they wrote against each other. So they were not only victims, but the holy victims, and they were part of this whole system. This is the system work as a whole. If you want, to be part of this system, this establishment, this culture of repression, you should contribute individually. You want one by one. You should contribute. You should add something to this. And then sometimes very, very personal things coming here. The rivalry, competitions, I don't know, jealousy, things like that. So it was very, very difficult to find the validity sometimes of these arguments. And we try to not touch some very, very hard accusation there, because it was too personal. And yes, that was that. But with just cross-checking, I think, there was what I was really, for me, was crucial in my approach was to go for questioning as much as possible, not rely on one sources. I tried, for example, in the case of Murtaza Alavi, when he was moved from to Dushanbe, he was living in Dushanbe in Tajikistan. But when he moved from Dushanbe to Tashkent, because he was trialed in Tashkent, and then I got all the information in Tashkent, all the information I needed from Tashkent, but to be sure that I have everything about his past activities in Dushanbe, I went and I also checked with the archive in the other republics and see if there is a sort of harmony between these two narratives.
Just to follow up on that really interesting question, in your cross-checking, could you give us a few instances where you have been able to cross-check the official KGB or the official governmental archives against personal archives? Because a lot of these people were leading intellectuals. They must have kept some sort of note. You mentioned that Sultanzade's daughter, that do they have any traces, any papers left from that period that could enable us to sort of change the official narrative and official accusations?
First of all, let me say that nothing left from them in the Soviet Union. Everything was taken. But I mean, this is a period that, you don't dare even, to take, a small picture of your family. If they knew you that, you have got a picture of the Sultanzadeh, the day after you'll be arrested. So people try to destroy whatever they have related to these individuals. So, but there are cases that we could cross-check. For example, with Ehsanullah Khan, thanks to Aramesh Dostar, who passed away, lived in Germany, I could get access to the family in Iran. And the family in Iran had some correspondence with Ehsanullah Khan in the early period of Soviet Union. So I could get another picture of the Ehsanullah Khan. I knew that, for example, Ehsanullah Khan in 2 occasions applied to return to Iran. So we knew about this. These things, and because one of the accusation of the Ehsanullah Khan was that he had access to his brother, and brother was in Tehran, and they had correspondence, things like that. So to try to see the validity of this argument, I could get them in the family into, but this is very, very few occasions.
Thank you. Other questions? Holly? Oh, yes, Professor Azad.
Sorry, I had a follow-up to my own question.
Jump in.
No, thank you for following. I wanted to ask, so one thing is using documents as sources for history, which you can cross-check. The other one that I'm very interested in is sort of understanding documentary culture in and of itself. So I wonder whether you look at, you said that these letters were sometimes written under duress, and I wonder whether you find some kind of format that was applied, some template. So can you sort of see a palimpsest, if you want, of Soviet sort of influence on what is being written here through the format of these letters?
This project is, as I said in the beginning of my talk, is 25, 30 years project is that. And during these years, I was very much involved in history of Soviet repression. I had contact with the Polish, with the Greek. I was invited to different conferences organized on different occasions on the repression. And every year I used to go to Moscow, to Lubyanka, and put a candle in the memory of those who were executed in the square of Lubyanka. So indeed, I extended my my network in the former Soviet Union, and trying to be more and more familiar with the culture of repression, not only, for example, concentrating on the reports of the Secret Service, trial accounts and things like that. But beyond that, for example, the title of the book is "Fallen in the Whirlwind." This is a title I borrowed from Yevgeny Ginsburg. Yevgeny Ginsburg is a writer, is a poet. So I went into the poetry of the Soviet Union, literature of the Soviet Union, from Boris Pasternak to the others who lived and experienced this culture. So I really, I lived with this community who were in 1930s in the Soviet Union, Nadelstadt, others. These are the peoples who really moved, and also, for example, the people who just wrote later about this period, Changiz Aytmatov from Kyrgyzstan. These writers, novelists, short story writer, poets, they really helped me to get a picture of the repression. How was the repression was operating? What does it mean fear? What does it mean transfer of the fear from individual to individual? Why doesn't mean, is it why the Stalins, why they did it try, to go to that extreme, to create a sort of homogeneous society? Sovietsky Chelovek, the people of the people of the Soviet person, Sovietsky Chelovek, like Ayatollah Khomeini said, "Insan Musalman Muvahhid Tarazidin." They wanted to create a Sovietsky Chelovek.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have a raised hand, Professor Tawakkoli.
We do.
Somewhere. Yes, Susan, I love you.
Susanna,
Hi, this was really informative. Thank you so much. Something about this made me want to ask you, and I don't know if you feel comfortable addressing it. This is so timely even for today, the issue of archiving and erasure of a whole community of people. We see this going on day after day with a lot of the modern and current unfortunate conflicts. Could you tell us as artists and educators what we could be doing, or what you recommend, what you would like to see in the future in terms of this initiative continuing to be important and re-energized, because it's so important for people to know their history? Thank you.
Thank you for this very, very emotional question. When I just put this memorial stone in Kommunarka, I was asked by somebody, "What is your dream?" I said, "I want to do the same thing in Khavaran, in Tehran." What I can say is just, let's not to forget what's happening. Remember and collect documents. We shouldn't, as a historian, we should keep helping, we should help keeping the memory, not the memory to be disappear. And this is what we really are. My advice is that, or my request is that, for the young historian, is document what you see, everything, and not only the political episodes and stories, social, everyday life is matter. Everyday life, to a large extent, exhibits and help us to understand the culture of the people. All the unknown, all the unanswered question might be answered through studying everyday life. Not top down, but bottom up. This is what I would like to see.
Just a comment around this line. I have been very actively collecting papers and documents on 20th century Iran, earlier times, and it's amazing to see that a lot of the papers, family papers that were ditched, were collected by garbage collectors and found their way somewhere that then I could go and acquire them. So in a sense, garbage collectors of neighborhoods, key neighborhoods, have been a key to my own personal archive. That and I have invaluable stuff that were tossed out, and then through garbage collectors, I were able to acquire. So I think we should, all of us, look through our neighbors when they throw everything out, all the papers, go through them. And I have done this quite actively in our neighborhood. And I see at the moment that they want to sell a house and move out, they rush and throw everything away. And someone should feel responsible to go through those papers and collect a lot of things that are invaluable for historical memory. Well, it seems like there are no further questions.
May I speak?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for interesting lecture. I'm, of course, belonging to other generation, to a later generation, but I do remember that in the school we learned poesy of Abul Qasim Lohoti, particularly his revolutionary poesy. And I think some of the Iranians who were probably somewhere were under Stalinist repressions, then were freed, and they were very actively involved in the sphere of literature and language in Tajikistan, for example, and they were very admired by locals as people who know the language as very good people, very good, how to say it, excellently bearing people, language bearing people. So, and
Please continue, Nasiba. That's it? Thank you. Touraj, do you?
Yeah, that is this is very correct. I mean, the Iranian from the very early history of the Soviet Union contributed a lot to building what you call it. I mean, Republic of Tajikistan. Many Iranian moved there, like Yusuf Iftikhari, Hisabi, Zara. They're different. I mean, they moved there. Engineers, doctors, poets. Lahoti was there, and at one point, I mean, Lahoti had to move to Moscow because that was he was accused of not being correctly a proletarian poet and writing love and erotic poetry and so on. But anyhow, talking about Lahoti, in our studies, in our book, we didn't touch Lahoti. We did it consciously. Lahoti was survived. Lahoti never arrested. And what we know that, I mean, in the file of Lahoti, there is something referring to Stalin's personal involvement. Stalin says in one of his letter to Yezhev, the head of the NKVD, says, "Don't touch him." And they never touched him. But he was many times asked to write reports and about the Communist Party of Iran and about the individuals who were purged later.
Very good. We have one more question from Mr. Masih Tahvildari. Please, Mr. Tahvildari.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Atabaki. Thank you, Mr. Tawakkoli. Thank you for this time. Mr. Tawakkoli, I have a question. Is it true that many those Iranian that you mentioned that were executed and tortured, they were not an ordinary people, an ordinary civilians. They were communism activists, and they tried to establish a system like a Soviet Union in Iran. And you know, it's understandable because they didn't know exactly about the communism regime, and because they before had an ideal image of that regime. But the question is that, you know, during the Great Purge, Stalin Great Purge in 1930s, especially 1937, but you see, few years later, after Second World War, there were also some Iranians who were devoted to those regime, to a Stalin regime, and they tried to establish some kind of regime, some kind of communism regime in Iran, and tried to apart some part of Iran in Peshawari period, and after that, against, you know, it's not understandable. It doesn't make sense. Mr. Atabaki, those Iranians had seen the, you know, the Stalin period and the Great Purge and the Great Terror, but they were still devoted to those regimes against Iran. I can't understand the reason. You know, could you please explain something, explain a bit about that? What's the root? What can be the reason? Thank you so much.
One quick answer and not quick comment. Quick answer is not true that all the Iranians who were purged were communist. Majority, absolute majority of them, they were workers with no political commitment. Millions of the Soviet Union were murdered. They were not communist, member of the Communist Party either. In Russia or in other Soviet republics. I don't know where you are based, but it's not only Iranian. Even in the United States, we had the Communist Party, the Canada Communist Party, the French Communist Party. Some of these members or leaders of these communist parties, they knew what's happening and they took distance from their party. They left the Communist Party. People like Silone, Kostler, George Orwell, they left the party in different countries. In Iran, Khalil Malaki and his followers, they left to the party. Not sure, not mainly because of this purge, but later on they added, I mean, this reason was added to their other reasons to leave to the party. So this is, we are talking about a trend, international political trend, that the communists, they think, I mean, what's happening in the Soviet Union was inevitable. The purge was inevitable because the communism, the Soviet Union needed that to fight against imperialism. This is their justification. The same justification you have today. There are some communists, of course, non-communists too, some communists, they think, I mean, that we should defend the most dictatorial regimes because they are anti-American. This is on the platform, on the background of these anti-imperialist tendencies or affiliation or lineage. This is this.
Thank you, Professor Atabaki. One last question from Dr. Purzan. Dr. Purzan, please. Do ask your question.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask it in person. I wanted to save time. I just wanted to ask how many Iranian women you were able to document in this research, Dr. Atabaki, besides those who were spouses or sisters or daughters, but on their own.
Thank you very, very much for reminding me. It was in my note, to say that. To find out about, the Iranian women victims of the Stalinist purge, I moved to Kazakhstan to a prison called Agir. That is 1 hour, driving from Astana. This is a prison only for the women. And there I find, not very much, less than 10 Iranian registered prisoner who were registered as Persian. But we know that I took these numbers, and there were other numbers. I took it from the University of Toilers of the East, KUTV, which was based in Moscow and training the communists in 1920s. There were also Iranian women there studying at KUTV. So I could manage in my book, to give the names of these women, because some of these women of KUTV later on disappeared. We don't know anything about that. They were not returned to Iran. They disappeared. So I tried to find out more about who is who, what's happened to this. So combination of all these sources made me I'm not talking about the wife and sisters and daughters. I'm talking about the individual activists, committed individual activists who were purged during the Stalinist purge. The Agir prison is one of the major prison in the Soviet Union for the female victims.
So you have come across and documented the ones that you were able to track.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I did. I publish all these documents. I publish it. This book is full of documents. I hope, the Edinburgh University Press agree to publish also these documents and photos. At the end of this book, there are a collection of the revolutionary posters. We found it in different archives. When I doing research, I felt I felt pity not publishing these revolutionary posters of the early 1920s. Very, very unique in different languages, in Persian, in Turkish, in Russians. So these are the handwriting of the individuals and family pictures and everything. One of these, interesting, very interesting, pictures. We find it, in the archive. If I let me to see that, Lodbon, for example, we find, interesting of the Lodbon and Hesabis, which nowhere you find, these. Let me to show one of the pictures I like very much. Is here, I think. For example, the Sultanzadeh with his daughters, we find it from the family archive. One of the very few photos of the aged Sultanzadeh. We know young Sultanzadeh, and this is aged Sultanzadeh. We find it, and Kesabi, I told you already, and Ehsanullah Khan, I told you, and once they made the film about the Gilan Revolution in 1927, and they asked the Ehsanullah Khan to play his own role in Gilan. So old Ehsanullah Khan became an actor and played the role. This picture, I don't know if you can see that. I love it the most here. This is Nichbin with his wife, beautiful wife. He's called Farangiz. They one of the wonderful pictures I could, get it. Very lovely young couple. And the sad story, deeply sad story, because they were totally marginalized by the Soviet Union, and finally they were purged.
Well, Professor Atabaki, thank you for your fascinating presentation and for taking us for an archival world in the Soviet Union. Please join me to thank Professor Atabaki.